as the background says. So yes, it will be public, but everyone's free to say be as frank and open as they wish. So no problem. Um, okay, so welcome everyone. I am Rahul. I'm the head of content at Jakara Media, and today we'll be looking deep into application experience. The monitoring, the security aspects. Basically an overall look at application experience. And I think you know it's really quite an extraordinary time, right? Over the past year or so, the application, whether internal applications or customer-facing applications, have faced unprecedented loads. I mean, everyone's working from home. Applications that used to have 10, 20% load, I have a 90% load these days. And it's become really a critical aspect of the digital platforms that companies have. So it's a very, very pertinent issue at this time. And the thing about application experience is a very delicate matter sometimes, right? So, if there's application experience, if there's any sort of, if it's running a bit slow, if there's some faults in it, sometimes it can be hard to diagnose. It could be your network. It could be that, it's a very old application. It doesn't work on the cloud as well. It could be that, your load balancing is off. It could be a host of reasons. So we have a couple of experts here to help you identify those reasons, kind of diagnose those problems, and really give the expert advice on how to manage application experience, security, and monitor them as a whole. So we have Jason from Kemp. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks a lot. How's it going today?
All right, very well. And then we also have Teddy from Computrade. So Teddy, hi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here, and yeah, look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. So maybe we can start with Jason. Would you like to give a very brief introduction, your background as well as Kemp?
Sure. So I'm Jason Dover. I'm Vice President of Product Strategy at Kemp Technologies. That encompasses working with our customers, with the partner community, ultimately to make sure we're working on the right things, discovering the challenges that our customers are facing as it pertains to application experience, working with our internal teams across development, across marketing, across business development and the like, and making sure that we're getting the right things put together to help our customers with the challenges that they're facing. My background, I worked in enterprise IT for quite a bit of time before coming here to Kemp, primarily in the financial industry. So I worked at New York Stock Exchange as an example, Deutsche Bank, number of other buy side and sell side banking environments. Primarily, it was really about integration of application ecosystems and what you would call global enterprise technology services that spanned across email, across IM, directory services, and the like. One of the things that I found most interesting at the New York Stock Exchange when they were going through a number of acquisitions and mergers with other exchanges, Ames, Life, Euronext, and other exchanges, worked on the email integration projects with those organizations. And you saw the importance of application experience, right? In the banking world, email typically is looked at as non-critical infrastructure, right? Because it's not connected to the trading systems. But if you run into a challenge during your migration where email is slow or you can't access it, you see just how non-critical it really is with the complaints and so forth that you hear. So I saw firsthand having the right infrastructure in place that helps you to understand where those challenges or those issues may be coming from, having a way to triage them quickly and get the right information from across the different domains that are connected to it on the same pane of glass, as it were. Well, that was ultimately critical while I was working on those projects. At Kemp, our heritage is centered in load balancing and application delivery and the technologies that surround it. So ultimately, you have applications. They need to have high availability. They need to have scale. They need to have a level of security added as well. Our products serve as a proxy to those applications and services to help with the distribution of traffic flows, making intelligent decisions, getting clients to the best possible backend target. And that, of course, extends now to additional architectures that are being leveraged, whether that's cloud architecture, being able to make decisions in a public or private cloud ecosystem, also with container ecosystems, being able to map what's going on in your kind of traditional network to what's happening within your microservices container ecosystem. And again, making intelligent decisions on traffic distribution, applying a level of security there, integrating with your identity systems, since the load balancer oftentimes serve as a consolidation point for certain security functions related to identity as well. In Q4 of last year, we went through an acquisition of a company called Flowmon Networks as well. And that added an additional wealth of capabilities to our product portfolio. Flowmon focuses on network performance monitoring, as well as network detection and response. And now you kind of are starting to bridge these different dimensions, right? The load balancer, the application delivery controller operates at the upper layers of the network stack, right? At layer 7, more or less, and has relatively low involvement with the underlying network, even though it participates to a degree. Flowmon has great depth when it comes to deeper network visibility. And so the thesis there, the objective is ultimately to connect the dots, right? If we can start to give you a picture of what's happening at the upper layers of the application stack, but connect that down end to end with what's happening at the lower layers of the network, well, that gives you a really powerful tool set on understanding what your application experience actually is. It also gives you capabilities when it comes to security and to mitigate things, because now you have not just the visibility side of things, but we also actively participate within the data plane. And so you can trigger workflows to perhaps steer around application performance problems, to have rules applied that helps to mitigate some sort of security issue that you've identified and the like. So we're really happy with the expanded team and the excellent skill set that Flowmon brings to the table as well. And we've already started to bring out some joint offerings together from a technology integration perspective. And we're going to continue that through 2022 and beyond as well.
Brilliant. That's an excellent overview. And especially the fact that you brought in some of your history in the financial services. I think, you mentioned the word triage, right? And I think the whole idea of, diagnosing the application is not unlike, diagnosing a human body, right? I mean, you got different layers, you got different systems, and then you identifying the exact problem can possibly take a while. The human is not quite at 100%, but you can't quite identify why. So I think it's an excellent opportunity for us to get really into it. Thanks, Jason. So Teddy, a little bit about your background, Computrade, as well as your personal background.
Okay, thank you again, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to just introduce myself. I'm the managing director of Computrade Philippines, and we are a mid-sized company down here in Manila, in Philippines. And we are a provider of virus solutions to the market, particularly on security and, again, load balancing. Okay. And a network monitor. We are a current partner both from a Kemp perspective as well as a Flowmon perspective down here in Manila. So our experience here in providing solutions to our market has been very, very interesting the past couple of months. I think you've mentioned very recently that the transformation and the behavior of a lot of people because of the work from home, the pandemic, has really pivoted. I think that's the word, pivoted the demands from an application experience standpoint. I mean, it's an entirely different model. The game has changed rapidly, and it's really changing how banks behave, how a lot of telcos are behaving, and a lot of companies are behaving. And that's where I think the discussion will have to be very exciting, because the application experience has really reinvented itself. From a logistics perspective, a lot of industries have been impacted, but overall the demands of our applications have just gone to a different level that we have not seen before. And the reason that we've seen it is because that there is still definitely a supply demand that needs to be addressed in the entire market. And the experiences of being able to address those needs are the ones that are very exciting for us. We've seen a rapidly changing market for us, both from a security as well as a performance perspective. I don't want to say this in the pandemic, but we actually grew quite well last year, and that's because of the needs of our customers. Some have not seen a lot of these spikes as they've seen before. So a lot of banks have really pivoted to a more of a digital platform, and that type of digital platform did present itself with needs that we can provide. You know? And then obviously some government sector things have also transitioned because of the pandemic and work from home and social distancing and so on and so forth and collaboration. So it all adds up. And I think that's where I think we need to step back and look really where we are. And because of this, I would say game changer that happened the past 12 months, we are now accelerating areas wherein I think historically we postponed because it was just a want. You know, I want to have a better performance. Now it becomes a need because the need is something that's of high demand. Performance, the immediate ability of users to have a very strong, intuitive type of experience with their applications is something that's definitely something that is an expectation already or a baseline. And that's probably where a lot of our discussions today will be circled down. And so I'm happy to be here. And again, thank you so much for inviting me and happy to provide our inputs on the discussions today. A very good morning.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Teddy. And a couple of points that you made were very interesting. So I think, you know, the fact that things that used to be kind of good to have and, you know, somewhere down the number 10 or number 11 on the list of to do are now number 1 and number 2, right? So the entire reorientation of the CIO office, I think, has been quite extraordinary. And you know, even the tech companies, they have had a bit of a sales bonanza in the past year or so.
Yes, absolutely.
Skyrocket. But you know, it's kind of strange, like, you know, the sheer number of companies that used to be successful have kind of faltered, and some companies have actually gotten even more productive than they used to be. And all the while, you know, companies have had to kind of get into the work from home mode, but at the same time innovate, you know, keep the lights on, come up with new products and services. So it's been quite an extraordinary year, and we'll get into that as well. So before we get into that, a bit of housekeeping. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so we've gone through a couple of introductions. We're going to get into the panel discussion proper now. And the Q&A, for the Q&A, I would love to hear everyone's questions throughout the discussion. So if you have a question, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel. So all the attendees, please feel free to ask questions throughout, and we'll try to address them as they come in. Next slide, please. Yeah, so you can either ask through the Q&A, raise your hand. Of course, it's better if you do it via the Q&A box so that, you know, we can keep the discussion flowing, and there's no sound issues or anything when the attendees are connected. Next, please. Okay, so really getting into the discussion proper, what I want to do is start a little poll. Can everyone see the poll? I believe they can. So basically, you know, I don't want to get everyone into a paranoid position at the very beginning, but you know, how confident are you that there is not any ongoing cybersecurity attack on your IT network right now? So again, you know, the bad guys don't stop. They are 24/7. There's cyber warfare out there. There's cyber mafia out there. So it's a good way to gauge just how confident you know, the sentiment on the ground in terms of, you know, exactly how confident everyone is about whether there's a cybersecurity attack right now. So from the trends, Teddy, Jason, can you guys see the responses?
Hang on, yeah. I can see the questions now. The responses not yet. Yeah.
Okay, so I think they're still coming in.
I think it's coming in. Yep.
So the general trend seems to be, I think everyone's not that confident, actually. I would say the average would be, you know, somewhere around maybe 3 to 4, maybe. So
it makes sense. I mean, you think today more and more of the anatomy of the types of attacks and security challenges you're seeing, they're 0-day, they're polymorphic. So you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah,
right? You've
exactly.
got to put the right controls in, but it's that's the same sentiment that we're hearing, and putting in more mechanisms to be able to detect what doesn't look normal, right? So that you can react and you can adjust, right? If you just have a set of stale definitions, even at the edge, that even are updated on a semi-regular basis, well, that's not enough with the type of attacks that we're seeing today. You think about file replacement techniques, you think about the ability to be able to gain privileged access to change the nature of how the malicious code behaves over some period of time, erase logs and footprints of what's been done. Right? It's a lot more challenging than it was if you rewind in history, say a decade. So I think that's actually not too surprising when you look at the nature of today's threat actors.
Yeah, and in the immortal words of Mr. Donald Rumsfeld, they are unknown unknowns, right? So, uh,
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
it's really the unknown unknowns that are, I mean, nothing rules based can capture them. 0-day attacks and stuff like that. It's just very, very hard to prevent those. So, a
Right.
very
Right.
interesting mix, a very interesting spread. So, what I'm gonna do is, so every poll will stay on the screen for about 3 minutes. So let me end the polling, and can you guys see it?
There you go.
Yep.
Oh, it's kind of distributed a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the mode is 6, and what I find interesting is that not many are very, very confident that they are not currently under attack. So that
Yeah.
is it's the uncertainty that all security and IT folks live in. It's 24/7 operations basically.
Correct.
There's
Correct.
clearly work to be done in the industry, because it'd be good to fast forward in time and we see that number a bit higher.
Yeah.
Right. My opinion is, I think the challenge with security in general, it's a moving target. It's not like you fix it today, then the problem goes away tomorrow. It continuously requires persistent and deliberate monitoring and management. It has to be that way, because threat actors are as well funded as those that are putting up the defense, and that's where I think they're as skilled, as well knowledge on how to hack you as much as you want to protect yourself. And that's the reason that the conscious effort of continuously enhancing and improving your security posture is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a fundamental asymmetry when it comes to cybersecurity, right? I mean, the fact that, it could be a 300, 400 employee enterprise, and against you are arrayed a whole host of, cyber warfare, cyber mafia, cyber criminals that might have actually more people than your entire enterprise. So, that kind of, especially considering that, we are probably in the midst of what we would call cyber war. I mean, there are, entire, hacking farms in place in certain countries that their entire job 24/7 is to attack you. So these are really, really difficult times from the cybersecurity arena. Excellent. So with that, let's move on to the actual questions, right? So um, maybe I can start with yeah, Jason. So when it comes to network performance and diagnostics, network detection and response, how do these impact application experience? So really, kind of, how do you bridge the network domain with the security domain, and how do those link together? And especially, when considering the fact that, again, the asymmetry, the fact that enterprises have limited resources, limited IT staff, how can they benefit from some of these tools out there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and especially from a resourcing perspective, when you think about an IT operation, you need to have the right people, right, with the right skill sets, the right processes, and ultimately the right tools. And what many organizations are trying to figure out is, well, how do you scale the team that you have, even if you've got the right skill sets, if you have some sort of resource constraints, which just about every organization does. Well, how do you get more out of that operations team such that they are able to get to the bottom of challenges from a performance perspective that may be popping up quicker, get to eliminate things that don't need to be looked at. So get a good noise to signal ratio, and ultimately be able to resolve those things a lot quicker. That's really the goal. So when you look at tools like network performance monitoring and diagnostics as an example, that plays a key part, right? Because the point of this kind of area of technologies is to help customers get context ultimately, right? There's a number of different offerings that are available from a what I would say general purpose IT monitoring perspective, and they have their part, right? They play certainly a role. Looking at things from the network vantage point, though, is an interesting approach. If you think about applications and you think about having some sort of performance issue as an example, you can look at it from different angles. You can look at it from the endpoint, you can look at it from the actual server vantage point, and that gives you a picture, but only when you actually see, well, what's happening in terms of the communication flows between the entities that are trying to connect and have a conversation. Well, you're able to then dimension and start to narrow down, well, why is it slow? Or why is there some sort of issue? Is it because I have jitter as an example? Is it my server response time? Is it the application response time? Is it one specific server within the ecosystem? Is this only affecting a limited number of clients, perhaps that are running a specific version of iOS on mobile? Is it users on a specific subnet coming over the VPN as an example? So the point is really to get deeper context quicker. Now, of course, you can get at that information through a variety of means, but it normally means stitching and stringing things together yourself across captures here, logs over there, and starting to bring that together to create a picture. NPMD is really about creating that picture for the network operator such that they can get to the bottom of those challenges quicker, as well as plan around them, right? Because you can look back in time as well, baseline what's happening under different types of circumstances and predict, well, if I were to have some load, let's say we're in the e-commerce space as an example, and I was to have a significant amount of clients, or we're having some event where we're going to have more of our internal users coming over external sources to access it, it's going to impact things. Well, NPMD is really meant to create that picture for you. Similar vein, I would say, on the network detection and response perspective. You have a number of different methods to look at things from a security point of view. Your edge security, of course, plays its part, but I'm really only looking at traffic that transits my network vertically. I have my endpoint security, which again plays its part and it's critical. That gives me a deep and narrow focus. You have a class of security technology I'd put kind of in the middle. I'd call it application security as an example. Things such as web application firewall, layer 7 centric IPS and the like. Again, narrow and important focus, but those things have conduits which can allow for some level of evasion. Normally, an attack or an exploit, to fully execute it, I have to start some level of communications over the network again. So again, when I'm looking at things from a network-centric point of view, I'm able to more quickly identify the footprints that are leading up to a successful exploit. As an example, we had a customer case where some sort of ransomware exploit where a bad actor was attempting to exfiltrate data, and we're able to detect that there's ping traffic that has payload in it. Well, that doesn't look quite right. We also see that there was some escalation on an RDP server that never happened before, and then admin access to a Samba share, and starting to be able to stitch that picture together just by looking at how communications are happening over the network. It's really the same thing, allowing security operators to scale themselves and get to a high fidelity visibility picture a lot quicker. Now, you mentioned another interesting point about network ops and SecOps. The point is that it's oftentimes the underlying same data source of which you're extracting insights from for both of those different domains. It's through a different lens, right? But network problems often are security problems. Security problems often are network problems. So the trend that we're seeing today is, well, how do I consolidate? How do I provide tooling that takes those same data sets, those same sources, and provides the right lens for those different groups to get to the bottom of things. We can remember the concept of the war room, right, where you bring your data guys and your database guys and your application guys, and it's really about trying to get mean time to innocence, right? The point of this trend is to break down the silos and have those organizations actually working closer together, because ultimately they have the same goal, which is how do I get an optimal and secure application experience for my customers?
Brilliant. The fact that it's looking at the same data through different lenses, I think that's really a very interesting point, because traditionally a lot of network folks were not came from very, very different sort of domains compared to the security folks, right? I mean, you have all these. I remember when I was doing university, we had a hacker who had no idea about all of network architecture and stuff like that, but he could hack his way into just about any system. And then you have a lot of these sort of the hardware network guys who came into the industry, and then they're not especially sort of they're not that familiar with some of the modern security threats and risks. So it's really kind of getting both parties to look at the same data with different lenses and sort of having a holistic and coordinated response. I think that's a really interesting point. Teddy, your thoughts?
Well, for me, the application experience definitely can improve with some sort of platform wherein a performance monitoring or detection and response is there. Reason being is that it has continuously improved itself in terms of how the experience can be enhanced. And my experience on it is you'll be surprised that some customers take for granted that, because the behavior usually is that if something is slowing down, you just gotta have to throw more hardware at it. I mean, that's a traditional way of trying to fix things. And then once you find out what exactly are the root cause analysis of these issues, then you realize some of them is just some scripting and tweaking and enhancements and so on and so forth. So definitely a platform by which a network for performance monitoring tool or a network detection and response tool is there. It will definitely help. Definitely, especially if the resources of the client or the end user is very limited, and which is in many cases that's the fact. They don't have 300 people doing security. It's extremely rare, even for large multinationals, that an entire team is just doing this.
Yep.
So it's usually a double hat or a triple hat, that the guy doing this is also doing the firewall, it's also doing the SOC, and just imagine the workload and the distraction that individual has, because he's burdened with the responsibility of tracking so many aspects of the network, both from a security and a performance perspective, that he doesn't know where to start. And these tools would definitely have the ability not only to isolate and identify what are the causes, but provide already recommendations by which to fix it, because of the response and remediation abilities of some of these tools. Okay, so that's kind of my perspective on it. And I think you'll also be surprised that when we do proof of concepts with our customers, these tools really open their eyes to that areas wherein they took for granted, or areas by which they didn't realize that those were potential issues or pain points that probably they just didn't realize, or they was not aware of, and that's where these type of tools are very relevant and very critical. But I guess the point of the matter is it sometimes these things never escalate further than the CIO, or probably not even the CIO or the CISO, and it doesn't become a business issue, and that's where sometimes that's the responsibility of us vendors to explain that it is a business issue, because the entire experience of the end user that you're trying to cater to is not satisfactory, or the security layers that you have provided is not satisfactory. So the customer satisfaction part of it comes into place, and that's how we usually explain it, especially that some of these security issues do reach the board level, and that's how you need to articulate it. So that's kind of where it is. So it is definitely right now a technical issue or an IT issue. However, if you really drill down and understand, it does have a direct correlation to a business issue that you're trying to address, which is really customer experience or application experience for that matter. So that's kind of my opinion on it. And these tools, they help a lot, and maybe they're just taken for granted, and it again falls under the category of want rather than need. Okay, so that's kind of my opinion on it.
Excellent. The fact that enterprises don't have infinite resources is very, very important, right? And we actually have a question that's come in. So, folks, if you could just put your questions into the Q&A box and not into the chat, so that everyone can see the questions. So, what role does automation have to play in the security scenario? What role does automation have to play in the security scenario? So basically, what is the role of automation in? I think as Teddy mentioned, the fact that there's not enough people. Your SOC team might be quite small. So how do you where does automation come in to sort of reduce the man hours required to monitor all of your, whether it's your network
Yeah,
or security, etc.
yeah. Well, I can take that first now. I think the automation part really helps a lot because it does reduce a lot of the noise that I think specifically sometimes IT people have to do themselves on a manual basis. If you're able to at least provide clear rules how to reduce that noise so that the IT people can really just focus on those that are very critical, they become much more productive at the end of the day. So automation does, to a certain extent, help a lot because it does reduce so many of the clutter that traditionally an IT person does have to take care of on a daily basis. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'll chip in there as well. I think that is the point where it's primarily being used is those repeatable and predictable tasks, right? If I have a high level of context on, let's say, a workflow that gives me the initial direction on what needs to be done next, that's where I often can apply automation. So there's some security event. This could be a simple example. There's a log event of a specific severity level, right? On my firewall or elsewhere. Well, there may be some additional information that should be captured. Perhaps there should be a full packet capture between the two communicating entities that are identified in that log, as an example. Perhaps there should be a dump, etc. And I pull that information back. Well, those things that, again, I normally have an operator having to do manually are really good tasks to put into automation, where it's still a bit challenging today. And of course, there's methods and approaches to getting better at that. But is when I have more complex and unpredictable things where I don't necessarily, it's more difficult to have a playbook in place for that type of thing that I wasn't expecting, right? I wasn't expecting, and I'm not quite sure what is the additional information and data that I need to get to the next step. That's where automation can be a bit more challenging. Now, of course, in more mature organizations and with what vendors are starting to put together, there are approaches for starting to tackle that. But I'd say it's still early days, and the early days comes from just comfort level that customers have, right? Am I actually willing to put complex decision-making out of the hands of my actual staff when it comes to things that we weren't expecting or things that could negatively impact application experience or lead to some sort of degradation? So I think there's really still rich opportunity on the vendor side to really key in on the types of things that customers are looking to have automated, but also in general, a lot of opportunity within the customer ecosystem to take more advantage of what's becoming available and ultimately free up staff to work on higher value problems, basically.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you mentioned having a playbook, right? So there's just so much preparation to be done even before you can start automating things. So much of your process has to be structured. It has to be well thought out. It has to be well mapped out, and only then can you launch an automation journey. So I think that's something that people forget. You can't just kind of replicate what a human being does, because there's so much intuition involved. There's so much, fine tuning of all the different data sets involved, that you can't just suddenly one day launch on an automation journey.
Yeah, that's the misconception. Oh, we'll just sprinkle some automation in there and everything will be grand.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, that's the secret sauce, and then everything goes away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you start realizing that, man, you're automating stuff that you're basically putting in. You didn't know that you are putting in garbage, and you are getting garbage out, and only when you get the garbage out do you realize that, hey, I had to kind of either structure my data better, categorize it better, or get my processes in order beforehand. So it's very, very important. So with that, let me get into another poll before we get into the next question. So what is your single biggest security concern? Uh, uh, for the audience, I'm not sure if Jason and Teddy can see the options, but
Yep.
the options are ransomware, data exfiltration, denial of service, compromised application, and other. So obviously, we asked everyone to choose only one, because I'm pretty sure if it was multiple choice, they'd be ticking on all of them.
Yeah.
But
I would.
so far, it seems to be ransomware seems to be at the very top. Any thoughts, Jason, first maybe? Um,
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, ransomware has certainly been on the rise. I remember reading a report about how many tens of millions of ransomware attempts were detected last year. It's smaller portion, of course, that were actually successful or that we heard about, but there's a lot. If you look into the dark web, into the wrong places or right places, depending on your personal view of things, you can actually find ransomware as a service platforms where there are threat actor service providers that provides the mechanisms required for actually building your own ransomware practice, as it were. So it's not surprising just seeing the rise that there's been over the last few years, and expectations are that unfortunately this is gonna continue.
Teddy, your thoughts among
Well,
ransomware?
yeah, well, ransomware, yes, obviously that's also on top of the list. I was supposed to answer during the survey that all of the above. Everything is crucial. Man. I
Yeah.
mean, it's so hard to answer with not just one specific. But if ransomware, yeah, for ransomware, it's something that they need to be aware of, and in fact, to a certain extent, they need to be mindful that event is going to occur in the future, and it's really more of how will you react in that type of situation rather than trying to position yourself that ransomware will not happen because of the so many things that's happening in the security world right now. I think the question was not a question of if but when. I mean, or when will you be attacked, or what's going to happen to you? These are questions um, of concern to everyone. Yeah, ransomware is there, and something that you need to be mindful, and how to react to that is something that you need to be prepared of.
Excellent. So I will end the polling now so that everyone can see the results. So final few coming in.
This one's interesting, but
Yeah, it is. I actually
uh,
see the results very soon. So actually, the results are themselves quite interesting.
yeah, I would say yeah, ransomware is number one, but
Ransomware
yeah,
is by far number one. Huh? And
yeah.
what's interesting is that, compromised applications number two. The fact that denial of service, maybe, all the CDNs that have come around, and I think denial of service has been, it's
Yeah,
not as severe as it used to be maybe.
it's more addressed now than before,
Mm.
because of the CDN solutions in the market. It's just much more easier for customers to protect themselves from denial of service.
Jason, your thoughts on the results? Curious for you?
Yeah, not surprising. I would say, of course, ransomware, as we talked about, that's right out there in the front. But compromised applications, I mean, we've seen a number of reasonably publicized cases just over the last several months. Of course, you had the Microsoft challenges. You've had issues on the Citrix front historically. So that's certainly caused pain points for customers of having applications that have become critical to your infrastructure. Right? It's not just something that have a small group doing a project on, but it's core to the operating of my business. So we've certainly seen that as a concern from customers, and they're looking to see how they can organize the rest of their network infrastructure such that when those types of things happen, well, can I leverage the other elements of my environment potentially to mitigate it? Whether it is my load balancer, my firewall, my next-gen firewall, what have you. They're looking for confidence from vendors that says, hey, if there is something detected, are you going to actually have something that can help me to address those potential compromises that may exist in application services that get discovered?
Excellent. And I think compromised application, again, we still have, we still have all the security concerns that basically just piled up from the very beginning, right? I mean, we still have like SQL injection attacks, in addition to some of the, the ransomware that's come up in the recent past. And you always have your malware, you have your targeted attacks. So it's just been piling up higher and higher, the possibilities of getting attacked. It's quite it's a crazy fragmented cybersecurity landscape at the moment. So that is interesting. Okay, so we have a question coming in. The question is about automation. So going back to that topic a little bit, managing expectations on the business part is tricky. Any particular tip on how to bring business on board on this journey? So again, all of your uh, IT team might be very well convinced about automation, but managing expectations, again, I think business probably expects the magic dust to be sprinkled and everything to be automated, and the IT team being one giant robot. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So, any tips on getting managing business expectations? So, Jason, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, it comes back to getting super clear on what are you really trying to solve for, right? What is the actual business objective that you're trying to achieve? And of course, yeah, there may be a office of the CIO agenda from a strategy perspective to start to leverage automation, but ultimately, it's a means to an end, right? It's not automate to automate. There's some challenge that you're trying to solve or some efficiency that you're trying to get to. Perhaps it may be reducing costs. It may be reducing some other metrics, such as the time it takes to get to resolution. It may be connected to the fact that the organization is attempting to be more agile, which means that there may be more of a chance for breakage to happen. And when that breakage happens, you want to be able to detect where it is, narrow down very quickly, and get services back online. But it could be something else. The ultimate thing for IT leaders is to work with the business to understand what are you actually trying to solve. That then narrows the focus in quite a bit, because you say, hey, let's bring in automation. That could mean a number of different things depending on the operating environment, depending on the domain, depending on the technology that you look at. You've got to get clear on the business objectives of the why, right? Start with why, figure out what is the metrics that you're trying to affect, and then pick a small and achievable project that ultimately, even before project, a prototype. Okay, how do we take this in a very small area and start to see if it's even viable within our operating environment to apply automation to meet that end goal objective? And I think that's really the starting point. If you do it that way, then that's much better than just saying, okay, we're bringing in IT automation, full stop, in which case you're going to possibly get caught out there, because you're going to start to have a small bit of distance between the business and the actual folks doing the implementation. Starting with clarity on the objectives, figuring out a small prototype to run is ultimately the keys to success and keeping people on the same page, I'd say.
Excellent. Teddy, your thoughts?
Well, I think here's my perspective on these things. I mean, the question is quite relevant in terms of how do you manage the expectations of business. I would approach it a little different by saying, well, when a business person, the vice president of marketing, the vice president of whatever operations or logistics says, oh, the system is slow. I mean, that would be a typical statement that they would probably pass on to a CIO. And then our customers are complaining that the response of our portals are slow. I mean, I would say that would be the journey. So I would approach it as like what I do on my own operations is I go through the journey myself, by which what exactly do you mean by the application experience is not pleasant? Is it because the response of the application is slow? Are there too many steps to authenticate a user? And that's an experience on its own. You're asking me 20 questions just to authenticate me. That's crazy, right? So I need to really drill down on what the experience is, because once I understand it myself as an IT person, then it's up for me to articulate what that is from a business perspective. So what I do is I myself become a mystery shopper, so-called mystery shopper, because whatever the business user is giving me as feedback, I need to tell him, no, I went through the journey myself, and I know what you're trying to tell me, and I know exactly what's happening. So when you automate it, you're going to tell me that, okay, so now I'm going to reduce the steps from 10 to 5. So the automation part becomes, steps 1 to 5 is automated. Steps 6 to 10 is not automated. It requires a bit of authentication and intervention, manual stuff, and all that. So what am I saying here is that for me, to have a much better buy-in to the other groups or the other business users, it's really just going through and hand-holding them on the entire journey and experience themselves. That way that you have a common understanding of what is fast, what is good, what is bad, what is slow. And that will essentially be the benchmark by which you will both interpret what the experience will be. Because experience, when you say experience, it's very subjective. It's very personal to you. And that's where it becomes very challenging to address, because what is fast to you may be slow to me. And that's where I think when we put benchmarks and measurements, like anything else, right? You cannot manage what you can't measure. Once we put those measurements in place, then there is a baseline by which to say if that experience was good, bad, slow, or fast. So that's kind of where I would put it. That way, when I'm the CIO and the vice president of sales comes to me, it's like I can't sell my $2 billion because all your systems are slow. Screw the application. Let's go somewhere else. So we need to be very patient and understand where he's coming from. That feedback essentially came from maybe the field or from the customer themselves, and we need to know what that journey is. Unless as technical people go through the journey itself of applying for a car loan, onboarding a user, and so on and so forth, the language and the conversation will always be not so productive. So that's kind of where I am on automation. Automation is, yes, absolutely, it's needed to a certain extent, like I mentioned, to accelerate by which the responsiveness of our systems is in a level by which not only is it acceptable, but very satisfactory to all. Yeah, so that's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, that's very important, right? I mean, the importance of setting benchmarks is just so critical, because, it could be that, different people have different standards for application speed and experience. It could be that, you also might have to look at your SLAs with your vendors to make sure that, everything is in order, and, they're not actually, they're actually meeting all of them. And even stuff like web applications, people get so impatient with web applications.
Exactly.
Now Google has put in a maximum amount for loading times, after which it will start penalizing websites. So even to that level, the patience and the impatience of people rather has grown tremendously, and that also has sort of made applications slightly slower in terms of perception over the years. Very important. Okay, so let's get a little bit into some of the NetOps and SecOps, right? So what I really want to ask is, you have your security operations, you have your network engineers, you have your app developers, you have your data or enterprise architects. So how do you sort of set that team up so that it's most conducive for ensuring the application experience remains smooth, and also that security operations are, there's no headless chickens running around, and it's as smooth as possible. So Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, ultimately you want those groups working together as a team, right? Even if they are in different parts of the organization. And if you think of the traditional way of doing things, you had these totally separate and isolated groups, right? So if you think of my background and where I worked, you had your architects, as you mentioned, kind of in the ivory tower to some degree. At least that's how the operations folks view them. You had your engineers that's getting a little bit closer to exactly how the infrastructure is going to be built, and then you had the operations team, who ultimately were responsible for running the environment. I'd say across all domains, and frankly, this is also impacting how software gets built in vendors as well. But is this movement towards saying, well, that's not really practical because you have a lot of handoff there happening, which means there's loss of context, and you also have distance between the folks that are figuring out how the implementation should be done and the people who are actually using the finished product that gets implemented. And so this is where this XOps trend is coming from, I would say, right? And that's to say, well, how do we start blending that a bit more? So the folks doing the architecting, the folks doing the engineering are actually getting a bit closer to the folks who are actually going to be consuming whatever gets put into production. Right. And so this leads to a different mindset. For that to work, I need to break down silos. I need different parts of the organization working together more as groups. And then it starts going horizontal, right, in an ideal world across dimensions. So that's effectively what I described as within a vertical space, such as within the networking team, within the security team, within the app ops team, et cetera. But if you can get that to work in your organization cross-functionally, well, you then have a much better environment as well. And so if you look at network and security, well, like we talked about earlier, how do you typically address a security problem? Sure, sometimes it's unplugging something, right, in a really critical scenario, but it's typically by making some sort of networking change. When we say, hey, we're going to lock that server down, sure, there may be some security group modification, but that often entails making some change at the network level to lock that server down, right? So it only makes sense that networking, NetOps, and SecOps should be working more closely together. How do you actually get that and implement it? Well, it comes back to goals, like I spoke about a moment ago. The only way that you can make this work is by having shared metrics, whether that's KPIs, whether you follow more of an OKR model or whatnot. But I need both of those groups working towards the same outcome for the practices that are put in place to actually be aligned. I need to be motivated to help the networking team solve their problems if I'm within the security group, and vice versa. Without that, you'll have some challenges. So it comes down to the metrics, the shared goals, and then ultimately, as we spoke about as well, having the right tooling that makes it easier for NetOps and SecOps to also collaborate.
Excellent.
That's
Yeah, Teddy, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Jason's spot on. I think the the joint effort is definitely the way to go. And I've seen it as well that for example, there's a breach and or there's an issue by which it was detected through the endpoint or the firewall or whatever. And I think that the challenge there is that sometimes when we work in silos, if it doesn't in fact impact our silo, you don't care, or it doesn't interest you because, oh, I'm just worried about my endpoint. I don't care about that, or I'm just worried about access management, and as long as that part of the role is okay, I'm okay. So I think when Jason mentioned earlier that the joint alignment is there, I use the word joint responsibility and accountability, by which the team is monitoring it as a team, all aspects of security, and they're also jointly designed or geared towards fixing it as a team, because security is always holistic. I mean, there's every possible vector is a possible breach, and that's the reason that it has to be seen as a holistic way. And sometimes it only trickles or rolls up to a CISO or a very senior security person, and that security person ends up to be the only person that's accountable, which shouldn't be the case. It should be every person in the team. If they see any irregularities or errors or whatever, is that he or she should be part of a bigger role. That I see something here. Do you guys see it in the other tools, and so on and so forth. So that way, there is a joint effort to try to fix something that you are experiencing on your side of the business. So yeah, absolutely correct. That's probably the best way to go, so that issues are addressed at the soonest possible time.
Excellent. We have a question again through the chat. Folks, please do put them in the Q&A box if possible. Is DevSecOps, just a marketing gimmick? So is DevSecOps just a marketing gimmick? Teddy, you want to take that?
Yeah, yes and no, maybe. I look at it at two perspectives. No? So DevOps is definitely, I think, a direction that a lot of companies are doing because of cloud and so on and so forth. Okay, I get that. Okay, but I've also seen that if a vendor or a product does not dominate a certain Gartner quadrant, lack of a better word, is that they invent their own quadrant and say, I'm the leader there. So I guess my opinion on it is it a marketing gimmick? Not really. I think what I'm saying is the security business in general is so fragmented. There's so many aspects of security that it's continuously branching off to other aspects. I would reflect back and say many years ago, concepts like advanced persistent threat wasn't even invented yet, but it became so popular when all these attacks came out, and it became like, oh, everybody needs to know what APT is. So, but again, it's a continuous effort by which, as attackers become more sophisticated and as issues become more sophisticated, specialization needs to be done, and that's the reason that these DevOps for security stuff become specialized as well, because I would say I would relate or make an analogy that COVID is just another virus, but you need to specialize or be very specific to for example COVID or COVID-19 for that matter, wherein, as you know, it's branched out to so many versions. There's like a territorial geography version of it, which needs to be addressed more specifically because the behavior of that geographic type version of the virus is just different from another geography. So I guess that's how I make an analogy of it. Reason being is that you need to just approach it in a different way, and that's the reason that when you ask me, is it a marketing gimmick so that they can dominate a certain segment? Yeah, fine. Yeah, it's probably true in a certain extent, but it's really because the entire market and industry itself has been fragmented to the point that there's so many branches of discipline that security has gone through that you can't just be, I'm a CISO. Yeah, there's so many areas by which you need to specialize on just to understand every aspect of security, and that's the reason that DevOps for security is also a branch of it. I mean, that's my opinion.
Oh, that's interesting because the security does tie into every layer of the IT stack, right? So it's I think the intention was sort of the intention behind the question. I'm supposing was whether because DevOps they have really it has really helped in restructuring engineering teams and getting your delivery out in the best possible way. But are there basically is DevSecOps something that's seen in the market in a very sort of well workflowed way? Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say what is being described as DevSecOps really is just best practices as it comes to application architecture, right? Because DevSecOps effectively is saying, well, you're thinking more about the security modeling that you're going to put in place much earlier in the development operations lifecycle. You should be doing that anyway, right? When you're contemplating how the application is going to be architected, how it's going to be consumed, it's not a good practice, but sometimes it's fallen into, to just say, well, that's someone else's problem to figure out how it's going to be secured. Those requirements ought to be defined right at the start. You should build with security in mind from the get-go. So DevSecOps as an independent concept unto itself, if the philosophy that's starting to be developed around it helps with getting more sound architecture from a security perspective, then all for it, right? But realistically, it just comes down to building things the right way in the first place. And yeah, it's got a bit marketized, I'd suggest. Baseline I sometimes use is, are we hearing customers reflect some of these phrases back that we're hearing in the industry and the like? It's not yet something that I'm hearing customers particularly articulate back. Again, I always try to get to, well, what are you actually trying to solve for? If you're trying to solve for having better security practices thought of earlier in the architecture, well, you don't need to fall into some quadrant or some special bucket. Let's just figure out what's the practices and processes that we need to put in place to accomplish that end.
Excellent, excellent. One of the other questions I had is not here was how does, the network perimeter is now a very amorphous thing compared to 5-10 years ago. The network has kind of fragmented quite a bit, and you have stuff moving to the edge. It's so much cloudier and so much less distinct than it was 5-10 years ago. So how does sort of visibility or the lack of visibility of the net within the network sort of impact application experience? So maybe Teddy, you want to go with that first?
Well, for me, yeah, I mean, we also carry network solutions, and Edge has been a very strategic strategy for quite a number of customers because of, again, the work from home stuff and the pandemic. And I think my opinion on it is that obviously as you go further out of from the core, there's a lot of unpredictability in terms of what that customer or what that user is experiencing, especially if you're a nationwide type of operation wherein you're for example, in my case or in Jason's case, you're in Florida, what's going on in California and how come you have problems there? I don't see it from down here. So I guess that type of statement always happens, that there's just really a different environment by which they're experiencing in certain geographies wherein you're really having a nationwide rollout, and some edge and some service providers probably will the issue, but again, that's really the environment that we are in now, and that's the reason that we need to be very mindful of how each of these customers, assuming that, for example, you're a bank in that case, so you're trying to have a very consistent experience across a nationwide deployment by which they're all accessing through different service providers, they're all accessing through different branches of your network, and the experience can be very volatile, and that's the reason that you need to be very mindful of how to make it a bit more consistent and less unpredictable. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Excellent. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, along similar lines, it certainly becomes a bit more challenging when you don't have as fixed a perimeter as you used to. You don't control all of the devices that are connecting into your ecosystem, and your environment that needs to be secured goes beyond the borders of the firewall. Much of your entities may be in a cloud ecosystem. Your identity system may not be on premises. So it certainly takes a different tack. I'd say ultimately you want to aim to avoid swivel chair administration as much as possible, right? And so as tooling is being evaluated, the extent to which cloud systems are supported is certainly something that's critical, right? If you're moving or exploring, moving services into Azure, into AWS, GCP, et cetera, well, your monitoring tool set doesn't support it, right? If you're implementing some sort of infrastructure technology that integrates with your IDP systems, to what extent are cloud IDPs supported? those are just a couple of very simple examples, but given this cloudier, more borderless ecosystem, a different lens at which you're evaluating the vendors that you're bringing in should be taken. And then your own policies, right? So how do you create policies that you can apply regardless of where entities are connecting from and what they're connecting to? Can you have consistent rules that are put in place? And of course, this is where we're seeing the increase on zero trust, right? So it's not just about visibility, but it's also about, well, how do I start enforcing things across my entire ecosystem? And so if I can build strong policies, if I can arrange my network elements so that I can apply the same approach regardless of where the endpoint is and where the client is, well, that's ideal. And of course, that's easier said than done, but similar to what we talked about with automation, you start small and say, well, do I have an example of a service or set of services that spans beyond the border? What's the outcome that I want to get to, and how I treat client connections? How do I get visibility? And can I accomplish that? And once you do that and you figure out, you see what doesn't work and what does work, you can scale that across broader parts of the ecosystem.
Brilliant. We were talking about the network and visibility and all that. So we've got another poll question coming up. So I think this time around, Teddy and Jason, I think you should be able to see this. So basically, are you able to get tailored network traffic reports? Yeah, so it's fluctuating. Teddy, Jason, can you see the results, or you can't see?
I see the question. I don't see the results yet.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question though. In our space specifically, sometimes it is a challenge for customers to actually know what's really going on in the environment. Either because you don't have the right tooling, right? Or you may have it, but it just hasn't been set up. You've got a lot of exceptions within the environment for special projects or legacy systems that are there. So having a clear picture of what current application performance is, how many applications you have in the environment, and details on communications, a broad picture. That's the point. Of course, I can go and I can get some sort of segmented capture from point A to point B or point A to point B and C, but having a clear map that shows me my entire ecosystem is not something that every environment has, and having it ultimately would help with solving problems.
Excellent. So let me, since it's just a yes and no question, I think we are pretty much okay. Last few coming in, and so there you go.
I would say it's
2/3
no.
to 1/3 thereabouts.
Yep.
So yeah, so
That's what I expected.
Yeah, is that Jason and Teddy? Would that, I mean, Teddy? So would that be the experience from what your customers see?
For me, I think it's very consistent. In fact, I'm not surprised with the answer of no. I'm surprised that the yes answer is as high as it is now. In fact, it's different because there's so many things that you'd like to get to extract as a report, because there's specific questions you'd like to find out, and sometimes those reports are not available. You can probably do an ad hoc report on it, but nonetheless, it depends on the tools that you use. Okay. So I would think, the answer is definitely no, but nonetheless, the 32%, which means that some of them are getting the reports they need, and it might be sufficient for them to make decisions and recommendations. But I would say in general, I was expecting the number to be higher at this point.
The no, is it? You're expecting that?
The no, I mean the no, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think as we get more and more software defined in terms of network, I think you'll probably see that number, sort of the yes, going up a bit. But traditionally it's just been so hard. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, so similar to, as I mentioned, it's not surprising, and pretty much what we're seeing with customers as well, that having that level of visibility on hand and easily accessible is sometimes a challenge. It's often a challenge, and it's a project to get custom detailed reporting that gives me an entire picture of the ecosystem.
Great. We have another 15 minutes or so left. So let me get through some of these questions quite quickly. So very briefly, right? So application experience across a multi-cloud environment. Obviously, you could have your own application. It could be a SaaS application. It could be using just a platform. You could be using the entire infrastructure. So you could have something on premise. You could have something on cloud A and something else on cloud B. So how do you sort of orchestrate all of? I mean, the orchestration part, I guess, it's a different issue, but how do you ensure that your application remains consistent, especially after you migrate a particular application to the cloud? I mean, I was talking to some folks who had a legacy ERP application that was custom built 20 years ago, and they moved that to the cloud with great difficulty. And then after they moved to the cloud, it was actually much worse in performance. So I mean, it's unsurprising, I would say, that it was much worse in performance. So with that multi-cloud environment, how do you sort of, deal with application experience? So, but Teddy, you want to go first?
Well, the application experience, the considerations, if that's the, well, if you mentioned a little bit on multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, every type of situation does behave differently, But if your question is the second bullet pertaining to the primary security considerations on application experience, I would say for me the critical parts is the access management of it, the who is accessing that application, as well as the encryption that is factored in on these applications to make sure that there is credibility in terms of how the applications are behaving and how they can be trusted by all the users. I mean, that's kind of my encryption and access management would probably be on top of my list as a mindset.
Excellent. Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, and on that example you mentioned of moving apps to the cloud and performance actually being subpar, well, there needs to be an analysis first of the readiness of the application for moving to the cloud, because just let's face it, application or actually cloud ecosystems are built to optimize certain application architectures, right? So if you bring a traditional or legacy 3-tier application, right, with requirements for real-time connectivity to the backend database, it's stateful in nature, it can't handle lossy connectivity to the storage ecosystem, etc. Well, you may have to take in some special considerations if you're putting that into a cloud ecosystem, and just doing a straight lift and shift without any consideration is likely to result in poor performance. So I'd say the first step is to evaluate the applications that you have in the first place, get to an understanding of their readiness for moving to the cloud architecture, and then figuring out, is it actually viable to just do a straight lift and shift, or is there some level of optimization? Even if you're not going to rewrite the whole application to be cloud native, is there some level of optimization that's needed? Is there some part of your technology stack that you need to bring along to supplement what's available with native cloud services in order to still maintain the same level of application experience? Those are some considerations that need to be taken before you start any migration process.
Brilliant. I could go on with a whole bunch of other questions, but I think we are almost out of time. So let me end off with a poll again. And this is an interesting one. So when you get a slow application, what usually turns out to be a reason for it? Again, it could probably tick all the boxes. But let's hear what people have to say. It should be quite interesting. So let me turn that question around for Teddy and Jason, right, while we see the results. So if a particular application is inexplicably so slow, how do you go about the diagnosis and remediation process? So Jason, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I something that we've said over time is it's always the load balancer. It was because that's what we've heard from our clients as well. So that is a good place to start, and it's a normal kind of troubleshooting step. You say, well, I've got I've got these entities that are in between. I'm joking a little bit about the load balancer, but it's how do I simplify the flow from where my clients are to where the application is? What can I take out so that I can start eliminating things, ruling them out as being the problem? So let's take the load balancer as an example. If I issue a client connection directly to one of the application servers in the pool, do I still get the slowness results or not? And of course, that only gives me some information because it may be that there's only a subset of the application servers that are having a problem, but it starts to reveal more information. If I've got a firewall in place, again, can I bypass the firewall? So it's a process of elimination ultimately. This again goes back to our chat earlier about automation. These are the types of things that you can automate because it's predictable. There's a playbook, there's a set of steps that helps me to identify what the problem actually is. Network performance monitoring solutions also plays a part here because it allows me to baseline my server response to the network response to jitter that may exist, retransmissions that are happening. Again, the goal, the philosophy is reducing the things that are needed to look at so that you can just narrow in on a few specific possibilities that are likely to be the cause of the issue. And that's typically a good model for shortening the time to resolution in RCA.
Excellent. Teddy, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's a little different approach, but again, the end state objective is the same. I'm a more of a hardware guy. So what I would do is probably check the entire infrastructure and find out what's going on, and go through every layer of the infrastructure. Is the servers timing out? Are the memories on optimal level or the activity is low? Because it will give me some idea in terms of if the IO level is in a certain level that's slowing it down. Because IO for me is read write. If there's enough read write stuff, is it the reason by which things are slowing down? You know, so infrastructure would probably be okay. So overload server. So would probably be the first behavior that I would start because I'm an infrastructure guy. Check the network, you know, and then you go down further and further to the point by which you can say to a certain extent that the infrastructure seems to be good. Then you check the applications, and then you check the other stuff like the security layers as a process of elimination, so-called process of elimination. But for me, the behavior usually is check the hardware, check the infrastructure, see how it goes there, and then I just go down the list. But for me, it's really that type of methodology.
Yeah, I think some of the results, they might have been different had we done this poll like a couple of years ago. I think overloaded
absolutely.
server is, it's a very classic sort of pandemic era problem. What I find interesting is that it seems to be that the majority of the problems do not stem from a fault in the application itself, but some of the underlying infrastructure that serves the application.
Correct.
It's quite
in fact, I just want to make an additional comment that the overall server is really more of a traditional way that things slow down. But if your application is on the cloud and you're in some sort of elastic model by which if it encounters any slowdown, the entire infrastructure stretches, right? So it shouldn't be the server anymore. Again, but again, this is usually a more senior infrastructure guy would approach it. Check the servers. What's going on? Are they okay? Are the clusters all working? So on and so forth. So and that way you can isolate by which the root cause of the issues are.
Excellent. Jason, your thoughts on the results as well as the issue of application being slow?
Yeah, definitely a logical approach. And, there's been a lot of improvements when you look at x86 architecture and what you can actually do with a single piece of compute, right? So if you look back historically, load balancers started off of, well, I'm getting to the maximum capacity of what I can do with a single server. That's less of a problem today, but still ultimately I may have an errant system within the cluster that is the source of the issue, right? It's not that typical that all of the servers in my cluster are giving me a problem at the same time. unless there's a much more systemic problem. So yeah, it's not overly surprising to see that a slowdown on a specific instance within the ecosystem is a problem. And again, having detection methods that helps me to narrow down to that level of granularity is key. So as you're going about architecting the application ecosystem and the elements of the network that connect to it, putting in place mechanisms that helps me to extract that, be it via network performance, be it via how I configure my load balancer, that ultimately saves a lot of headache if it can help me to point to, yes, you are having a server problem and it's this server. You should do something about it, or better yet, can I take that server out of the rotation for some period of time and trigger the workflow to let the operators know that there's an issue that needs to be triaged here to get it back up and running and back to 100%.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, right? Because as your sort of your software gets abstracted out from the hardware more and more, you get more and more layers of stuff basically in between. So on the one hand, you get greater intelligence because of all the software tools. On the other hand, there's just more stuff out there. So it's as IT systems get more complex, I think is going to be an interesting compromise between the intelligence you can get, but just the sheer number of things that you need to remediate. So with that, I think we are pretty much out of time. Next slide, please. So we would really love to have everyone's feedback. And in the meantime, if I could just get some closing remarks, maybe first from Teddy and then from Jason. Teddy first.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you for inviting me here. I think it's been a very interesting hour or so to discuss really the application and experience and what aspects of it need to be considered to make sure that not only are applications supposed to be always reducing downtime, but really just having a more pleasant, optimal experience in applications. I think when we move forward to the new norm, the manner by which we will approach and address these challenges is going to be different. And like I started my introduction earlier, I think we have to have really a different mindset how to approach things. Our traditional ways of approaching issues and applications and security for that matter have all changed because of the acceleration of digital transformation, the acceleration of the new norm and work from home and other aspects of it. So for me, this topic today has been relevant. It's going to be relevant and will continue to be relevant as we move forward, and it has to be something that a lot of our IT executives have to consider as they move forward with their strategies and their initiatives in the next 3 to 6 months or even 12 months. And making sure that at the heart of every business is their applications. That is really the secret sauce and the magic formula by which they become successful. And that's where they should start making sure they protect it and optimize it to the level by which it is really the lifeblood of the business. So that's kind of how I want to finish off, and it's a business issue rather than a technical issue, and this is how it has to be addressed by a lot of our executives now.
Excellent. By the way, everyone, if you could just, I have pasted the link to the feedback form in the chat. So if you can just click on it. I mean, you can obviously use the QR code, but you can also put the link there. You can just click on the link there and be taken straight to the feedback form. So yeah, Jason, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts will be similar and aligned well with Teddy. The network and the infrastructure ultimately is there to service applications, right? If it wasn't for applications, I wouldn't really need a network. I wouldn't need that infrastructure. And then ultimately the applications are there to service the business. In fact, it's often how clients experience the value that you have to offer as a business or as an organization. So given the fact that the experience that they have is often the way by which you differentiate, having a focus on application experience is critical, right? It may be the difference between winning or losing within the marketplace. And this is why we're seeing such a trend focused on it. And it's why we do what we do at Kemp, is ultimately to help our customers deliver better application experience for their customers.
Excellent. I shouldn't probably do this, but this is an excellent book written by, well, I guess you guys can't see. Maybe, yeah. So it's a book on application experience written by Ben Hodge from Kemp. And it is, you can just search for it on Amazon, I suppose. So it's been quite enlightening reading that book. So it's a fascinating age that we live in. You know, milliseconds might make the difference between you know, $1 million and $100 million in revenue. And with that, application experience has become and come to the really the forefront. It can mean the difference between retaining employees or getting, you know, all your millennials leave your company. It could mean getting your e-commerce sales past the $1 billion mark. So it's a fascinating time we live in. So thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Teddy, Jason, will in the next session probably we'll talk about stuff that we missed out. You know, stuff like the role of AI and machine learning. It's really interesting, really critical stuff. We couldn't get to it, but next time I promise we will. So thank you all very much. Have an excellent afternoon. And Jason and Teddy, thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the next time.
Happy to be here.
Likewise.
Forward to the
Thank
next.
you.
All right.
And
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.